What's up, everybody? Welcome to the Existential Stoic podcast, episode 59. I'm Randy. I'm here with my buddy Danny. What's up, Danny?
What's up, Randy?
So today we are talking about the most important education you will ever get. And it's not a university education, not from MIT
No
or
way.
Yale, not even Princeton or Harvard, not University of Pennsylvania, Stanford, none of them. It's actually a self-education.
Boom.
Yeah, I think it was like Whitman or somebody who said, I never let my schooling interfere with my education.
Yeah. But, it's funny too, because it's like all those institutions you just mentioned, right? All these like premier universities, they're kind of elitist and they're selective, and so first of all, not everybody can get into them, so they're just not an option for everyone. I mean, they only have so many seats. Literally, there's a finite amount of space. The other thing is too, I remember even when I was in college, I took classes, but I was always educating myself on other stuff, usually at the same time. And oftentimes, it was more important than what I was actually doing in my classes, because it actually helped me more long term. And I think people don't realize that, I think we stay young when we continue to learn. We keep our minds open, we keep our perspective broad, and it really makes us, I think, just better people in general, but also, more more adaptable and more dynamic in our lives. So
you make a good point about staying young when you learn. So, nowadays the pace of technology is quickening at such an insane rate that had you have graduated from one of these top universities 10 years ago, whatever you learned there is, it's not useful anymore, basically.
Well, yeah, right. In certain fields, especially, you'd have to keep learning because you'd be outdated by that point. Yeah.
But one of the most useful skills you can learn is actually learning how to learn. And this is something that I never got until I went to veterinary school. I didn't actually know that it was possible to study. I was very, very fortunate. I was naturally gifted in school. And I just thought you went to class and then you take the test and hope for the best. Yeah. And hope for the best. And so it wasn't until vet school where they actually, the first week of school, they had a whole bunch of classes on how to learn, how to take notes, how to listen.
Oh, that's
listen for what the instructor is emphasizing. And oh my gosh, when I learned that stuff, I had the secrets. There was one class where 6 out of 7 exams I got 100 on, because I was so good at listening for what the instructor was emphasizing. And I knew what the questions on the exam were going to be. It was so easy because they gave us the information for how to learn.
Well, that's the funny thing is I think, I said this before, I think that's one of the biggest issues with our education system is that's what should teach people is how to learn. How, if you have a project you're doing, or if you want to learn a new skill, how do you do it? How do you actually, how do you develop critical thinking? How do you vet resources? How do you do all these things that will help you then learn? And like you said, how do you know what's important when you're reading something? Because you can do it whether you're reading or watching. It's how do you know that something is more important than something else, or that it's being emphasized, so that you can actually identify the right or the most important information throughout, right? And I think that's crucial.
Yeah. So, I mean, there's a whole bunch of different ways to do it, but I think the first most important thing is you have to choose something that's important to you. Because I mean, you probably had the same experience in school, but remember they made us read all that garbage, classics that were back in the day when people got paid based on how long it was. So they would just write these ridiculously long books that didn't say anything that nobody was interested in, because it was because that's what we've always done. So we'll continue to do it. And yeah.
No, I think you're right. I think, identifying what you're interested in, because interests are always going to help you with your motivation, right? If you're interested in something, it's going to keep you motivated. It's going to keep you engaged. And importantly, I think this is what we forget. We talked about this before, it's so fun to start new stuff, right? But if you don't have a really deep interest in it, you're going to hit that middle area, or you're going to get over the sort of the novelty of it, and you're going to crash. because you're not going to be able to actually keep the motivation up when you need it, when it gets hard, and when the progress becomes, more minimal or more of a snail's crawl, because it will happen. Just like exercise, right? If you do have an interest in it, it's a lot easier to exercise than if you're not at all, because you can keep that motivation up. So I think that's, what you're interested in is crucial. And I think there's things we can do to really help us as well. So like one of the things I was thinking about was like, there's all this research and how to like, develop syllabi and how to, theories on education and stuff. And some of them are actually, I think you can just apply them to your life. Like, for instance, like building a course syllabus, they always use this terminology called scaffolding, right? And backwards course design. So you want to identify, what are you trying to get out of this? What's the main thing you're trying to teach? And designing it backwards, and then scaffolding assignments so that you get basic skills over time, right? And all it means is you're breaking it up into small parts. You're making mini goals throughout the semester and doing it right for ourselves. We've talked about this before. You have a big project or something you want to learn that's big, like programming, or you want to learn like, a new career path, or even just like how to eat right and how to diet, right? You can break that up into small pieces, and then the goal isn't so far off. It's easier to keep going, and you build the right skills throughout.
Dude, I love that, and I'm laughing because there's this motivational speaker, Brian Tracy, who's like very well known. He has a whole program on goals, and he's like, listen, everything can be summarized to 3 steps. Figure out what it is you want, break it down into steps, figure out how you're going to get it, and then work on that every day. And it's like that's basically what you're discussing there. Yeah, yeah, but it's applicable
it's like,
both to your studies,
anything,
but also to your personal development.
Yeah. And I think that's what's important. It's learning how to educate ourselves is not just about what we're studying. It's about anything in life. Literally anything can be broken down this way. And what I always liked about the language of scaffolding is it's identifying the skills that you need to build up to that later goal, right? Like if you're trying to do a complicated thing, like, we're both learning computer stuff, right? Programming and things like that. You can't just jump in anywhere. You can do a point, but you really, because you need to build certain skills up. You have to understand what's the language. You have to understand logic. You have to understand how to read it. All these little things. You might need a vocabulary set. You might need to understand even how to install certain things on your computer so that you can even do it, right? And like, so you have to identify, what do I need first, and how can I build so that I'm always progressing towards my goal, rather than, it kind of prevents a lot of these plateaus, I think, and it can help us, minimize how many obstacles and unknowns we run into over time. I think it'd be very helpful.
Yeah, and it's good when you set it up that way, because then when you get to the place where you're learning something new, you have that foundation from stuff that you learned before it. Yeah.
Yeah, it works well.
Yeah, absolutely. So we spoke about how interest is important, and like, okay, so here's another thing that stops so many people is they're like, I don't know what I want. Like, there's so many things that I want, or I don't know what I want, So it's like one of those two versions of things. It's like, I want everything, and clearly you can't. You can have everything.
No,
you can have anything, but you can't have everything. So like, you have to be selective.
There it is.
Yeah. Or they're like, I don't know what I want. And I remember there was another goal person who was talking about goals, and I think it was I don't remember who it was, but anyways, Jim Rohn, I think. And he was like, here's the secret to goals. Figure out what you want and write it down. And it's like, it's so insanely simple, but it's so true that like, you just do that and you'll have them.
It's funny though. I think when people say that too, when people say like, I don't know what I want, or I want so many things, it's also an excuse not to do anything, not to get started. Because the fact is like, I want a ton of stuff too. And that's why I do lots of things. And I have lots of hobbies, because and as you do that, though, you can also, whether we might think we want a lot of things, but there's also certain things we want more than others, or practically speaking, might be more important. Like a career change might be very important because you hate your job and you need money to live, right? So those two factors might contribute greatly to putting more emphasis on that. So I think you're right, like identifying what we want and that prioritization, which you talked about before too.
I actually just learned about this other method for goal setting that is really helpful. It's from Ray Dalio on Principles. How I think a lot of the people who get stuck with like, I don't know what I want, it's because they're trying to mix what are things that I could potentially want and is this realistic? Can I achieve this? Whereas
Oh, that's
those
a good
those
point.
should theoretically be separate steps. Like, here's all the things that I want to do. Like, it doesn't matter. I want to be a billionaire. I want to do this. I want to do that. Like whatever. And
An
then
underwater
that's
sea
that's
explorer.
right, exactly. That's step one. Like all the things in the realm of possibility that could potentially excite you. That's step one. Then step two, you figure out, can I actually do these? Do I actually want to put in the work to do these? That's step two. So that way, at least it's there. And it may not be possible now, but who knows, maybe in a couple of years, you might change your mind and you already have it written down.
Well, it's funny too. I'm glad, the recognizing that it's going to take work too, no matter what you want, it's going to take work, no matter what your skill sets too, because you're always going to need to develop new stuff. I was listening to this thing the other day, dude. I was cracking up because it was like they were talking about how people use like Instagram and YouTube and watch these videos rather like as like to live vicariously rather than doing things on their own. And one of the points they made was that, TV, internet and stuff, it makes all these things like playing instruments, programming, literally everything, cooking. It makes everything seem so easy because you're watching experts do it that when people try it, they get discouraged immediately because they're not great. And it's like recognizing that anything you want to do, this is why you can't do everything because it's hard. You have to learn a lot and it's going to take a lot of time. And so you really have to want it. And that goes back to the whole goal thing in the first place, right? You have to really get clear on what you want so that you can commit to it and actually do it. And this is why I've also suggested before, I think hobbies are a great way to explore stuff and kind of weed things out because we don't always know. Like, look, I mean, like I said, I love photography, but it is a hobby for me. I'm not trying to pursue it as a career. So I give it a certain amount of time. I find it very enjoyable. I don't want to do it though all the time. And I think that's the important thing, is knowing these things. Like what in my life is something that I want to be a part of my life, but isn't something I'm going to commit all that time to where that's going to be my sole focus or my sole career or my sole, income level. I want to ask you too, because I think this is important that a lot of people get stuck on this, is when you identify something that you want to do, how do you vet sources? How do you find courses? How do you find, teachers? How do you find mentors? What do you look for? Because I think this is something a lot of people struggle with and don't know how to do.
Yeah, okay. So great question. First off, I think the whole mentor thing is garbage. If you're searching for a mentor, you're just lost already. So I'll say that.
I should have said, no, I agree with you. I should have said like mentors in the sense of like biographies
Yeah.
or like books, that kind of thing. Not like, yeah.
Yeah. But I mean, I'm glad you did bring that up, because everybody, like, that's the thing. You like
The mentor
decide you
thing
want
is
to do
gone.
something, and then you get stuck in this self-help loophole, or like rabbit hole, whatever. And they're like, you need to work a million times harder than you've ever wanted to work. You've got to commit to it wholeheartedly, put everything else to the side, and you've got to find an amazing mentor. Reach out to the top 5 people in your industry. And it's like, no, that's
None of those things are
that's
true,
stupid.
actually.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
stupid. Like,
None of
and I'm pretty sure the reason why they say that is because then when people are like, I'm not getting any results, and they're like, did you do the things that I told you? Did you reach out to the 5? And it's like, no, you can't find the email of like the top 5 people in whatever industry.
no.
So I think it's garbage. I think you need to start where you are with what you have. And so, like me personally, when I start something new, I I search on I search Google. Like, that's the easiest way.
Obviously,
You ask
yeah.
it a question. Like, people always think that I know the answers for everything. It's just because I've become skillful at searching on Google. Like,
But a lot of people are not, though. That's the funny thing, right? Like, no, I'll give you a good example. Like I was trying to, when I started learning Python, right? I actually did a Google search. I did, what are the top 5 books for learning Python? Because I knew personally, I do use courses. I use online courses, but I like, here and there, but I prefer having a book. That's how I learned the best I know myself. So I did a search of what's the top 5, but I didn't just look at the first list. I look at about 20 and compare them. And I think this is a mistake a lot of people make too, because they'll go on those, even if they phrase their question right, and they're like, what's the top 10 things for this? They'll just take the first one, assuming that that's the best. It is not necessarily the best.
oh,
And I think
totally.
you need to look at this. Yeah.
One of
You need
the
like a broad
best things,
cross section, so you can like actually decide which ones are better.
yeah. Like, fortunately, around the time that the internet became very popular, I had a business doing search engine optimization for other people. So I learned that
Exactly
nothing on the
right.
internet is actually true. It's just
No.
whoever pays more for it. And also nothing is true in that most of it is just what's making money for the person who created that content. So
Yep.
like that having the ability to see through that part of things, that's very, very helpful.
Wait, but I think no, you're right. Like nothing on the internet is true, but there's no reason to get discouraged either because it also offers us. I think there is a lot of resources that if you're conscientious, you can use them. Like for instance, like if you're searching for books or courses, look at the reviews. Does it have a lot of good reviews? Does it have a lot I usually use Amazon, like the star rating is helpful, right? Or like does it have a like if 100,000 people watched it on YouTube, did 7,000 like it, and that's pretty good. I mean, like so just looking at that kind of information and getting smart about it and
and
taking everything with a grain of salt. You're right. Like don't treat these people as if they know everything because a lot of them don't.
yeah,
Even
yeah.
though they'll tell you.
And I really think you have to start with where you are because everybody, like, it's a very easy trap to get stuck in to try and have like
Oh
all your
God,
ducks in a
yeah.
row before you get started. And I think that's a mistake because you don't know what you're going to need until you
No.
get into it pretty far. And like even with material online, like Google search algorithm used to be where the sites that ranked the highest were the sites that had the most other sites pointing to it, like the most references.
Yeah.
They were the most referenced sites. And that kind of happens with books as well. Because when somebody writes a
Yeah.
good book, everybody talks about that book. Like, and so even if the first book you read is not good, eventually it'll point to other books and other books, and eventually you'll find them. And
Yeah.
I think it was in the 4 Hour Work Week or something like that, where he was saying how he was talking about becoming an expert. And he's like, if you read the top 5 books in any field, you'll become one of
Yeah.
the topmost experts in that field just from reading 5 books. And that like
Yeah.
blew my
Yeah.
mind because we both love to read. And,
Yeah.
it's like somebody says, I mean, for the average American, that takes 5 years to read those 5 books. But for us, that's like, half a month, something like that. And it's
Yeah.
just,
Yeah.
and so it's just like,
I literally read a book on Sunday.
yeah, yeah, exactly.
Like
And
the
so
whole thing.
it's like, holy crap, I can become one of the top experts in something in a, a few weeks. This is incredible.
Yeah.
And so like that, I think that is one of the keys to education. And I just want to say a couple things before you jump in. So like
Go ahead. Go ahead.
my grandfather, who was one of the smartest people I ever knew, he was always reading books. Like all my memories of him is just him sitting there reading books. And he, like my whole childhood, he would always try to encourage me to read. And then we have Warren Buffett and Bill Gates, two of the richest people on the planet, who were asked if you could have any superpower, what would it be? And both of them responded, the ability to read more quickly.
You know what's funny? The superpower I always wished I had when I was younger was to touch books and have read it. Do you know what I mean? Because like, oh
Same.
God, it would be the best fucking thing in the world.
I
It'd be
know. I
so
just wanted
awesome.
to be able to like flip through it, like,
Dude,
and
I would just go through the library and just be, it's like that's all I used to think about all the time. Because like reading takes a while, it does. And like,
Mhm.
I think you're right. And I think here's the other thing people underestimate with reading and why it's so important is the more you do it, the better you get at critical thinking, the better you get at identifying what's important, what's relevant, and the better you get at understanding arguments and how things work. Because I think we forget that like, any book is going to be written in a way to understand. It's rational, and you get better at reasoning by interacting with these things. And you can have life experiences or imagine life experiences through vicariously by reading, right? You read biographies, you see other failures, you see other successes, you can use that to your advantage. I think that it's so important.
Yeah. And so like a lot of people get stuck at the area of like, every time I try and read, I fall asleep. And it's like, yeah, good. You probably haven't been sleeping enough. Like
Yeah,
that's
yeah,
that's a good thing to know. You should probably sleep some more. And also, same thing happened to me and Danny when we started reading. Like the first dozen times you try and read, you're gonna fall asleep because
dude, it
it,
still happens.
yeah, in the rest, like
Yeah.
I mean, literally in the rest of your life, any other time you stop, the only time you stop in your day is when you fall asleep. Like even on,
Yeah.
I on the subway and stuff like that, people are just on their phone nonstop, like
Yeah.
Facebook, Instagram, all this stuff, and it's like nobody stops other than just to go to sleep. So no wonder you fall as soon as you stop to read, you fall asleep. It's like you've programmed your body that way. But eventually you keep doing it again and again and again. That's part one. And then part two
Oh,
is
can
you
I
gotta
can I add
find,
something real quick?
yeah.
Okay. I was gonna say, everybody is on their phone all the time. And I think one helpful thing for reading is just get Kindle on your phone.
Mm-hmm.
And honestly, it'll help you stay awake a little bit because you're still using your phone to the screen light and all. And the other thing is, it's right there. You put it right on the middle of your home screen, so you see it all the time. Encourage yourself, and you can download samples of books, which is awesome. You can actually test out books before you buy them. It's great.
That's a great point. And also with
Yeah,
Audible, I mean, you can listen to books
yeah, yeah.
nowadays. How awesome is that? Yeah.
Dude, that was my favorite thing when I used to commute an hour each way. I listened to so many books, like literally, and from everything, biographies, fantasy, science. I mean, it was just great. It was so fun.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So the second thing is you need to find something you're interested in. Like we touched on this earlier with school, how they make you read all these books that are just terrible, like
Yeah,
absolutely terrible books. And then you're like, I don't like reading. Why? Because I didn't like reading the Scarlet Letter and Little Woman and Pride and Prejudice. And it's like nobody likes reading those books. Like
no,
you're
no,
normal,
it's universally
100%
true.
normal. Yeah, 100% normal. You know, so like you need to find the books that you're interested in, and then you get like down that rabbit hole where you start like really, and the cool thing is
Well,
then you can be like, oh, I want to do this, I want to know this, I want to have that, and you can start reading books about people who have done that, and you can learn everything that they know like
yeah.
instantaneously.
Well, I'm glad you brought that up because we both love fantasy and science fiction. And I'll read science fiction books and then I'll go get a book on quantum physics because I want to know more about something that they brought up, right? And this is just for fun. It has nothing to do with necessarily but I think that sort of exploration too, because you go deep into a topic, you can really, I think improve your ability to learn on your own. And I think people forget how much it's just reading. It's just comprehension. And sometimes that means learning how to take notes, learning to start writing things down. Honestly, I think one of the best ways, if you struggle with learning how to do that, one of my favorite ways to take notes is just anytime I see a cool quote, whether because I find it interesting, confusing, funny, I write it down in a notebook and I write a sentence about why I thought it was interesting. That's it. And that will help you remember information so much better because you're actively reading rather than passively reading. And I think that there's so many simple things like that that you can do to just boost your level and become self-educated and help yourself improve in that way. I also wanted to point out too, I'm glad you mentioned, you know, the idea of needing all this stuff when you start. Like we talked about this when we started the podcast. We were doing it in a car with our phone, and like I remember seeing other people like that were starting one being like, what software do I need? What microphones do I need? I'm like, dude, you're gonna spend $2,000 on a mixing board and stuff. Like it's not necessary. Do the thing first. Start it first with what you have. Don't waste a ton of money because you might have to make adjustments and changes along the way. And I think with that, when you set up like a plan and your plan does not have to be perfect. You're always going to run into moments where you have to reset, where you have to change things, you have to adjust because you realize, oh, I need to learn something else, or I need to do this. The important thing too is to get started. I think we've talked about this so many times, but like you find something you want to learn, just get started too. Don't waste too much time on preparation because it's like it can be a means to sort of make yourself feel better, but not really do anything, just like procrastination, just like so many other things. So you want to do a little bit of research, get going, and start working towards that goal, whatever it is. And then start setting specific, realizable goals. Whether it's, be able to write 15 lines of code by this point, or whether it's, be able to actually, cook a batch of cookies from scratch by the end of the month, or, whatever your goal happens to be, have something specific and realize it by that point in time.
Yeah. So I think that's great just to like get started. So I have a example of something that happened this weekend where basically because I've learned to educate myself, I was able to, have like some pretty miraculous breakthroughs in just a couple days. So like,
Yeah, not the best.
dude, incredible. Like
I had a
beyond
huge one last week. Yeah. Anyway, go ahead. Sorry.
beyond what I could have expected. So like On Friday night, I had like a moment of like very high anxiety, and it like bordered on like very bad depression. And I was like, I thought I was
Oh,
through
it's the
this. Oh
worst.
no. And there was like all this
Yeah.
shame. Like I thought I didn't have to
Yeah.
deal with this anymore. And it scared me more than anything else. And like I just got through it with some breathing. And then I went to sleep, and like I woke up in my sleep with like a cold sweat, just like complete
Oh,
fear of death, like everything, just like losing my mind. And I was just like, oh my gosh, I thought I was through this. Like I was having a full-blown panic attack, like in bed,
dude,
woken up
when
from
you
sleep.
wake up to with it is the worst. Those are the worst ones because it
Yeah.
hits you full on. The second you're like, nah,
And so
you're not
like the
awake.
first,
Oh,
it was like I was extremely embarrassed about it. And I was like, I can't believe that I'm back here. Like, because every moment that I've ever had any type of panic attack or depression or fear of anything, it was all like there were all the examples right there for me. But
yeah.
on the other hand, was all these like these good habits that I've instilled in myself. And it's just from these like daily practices that I do. So I was sitting there in bed terrified. And but I was like, okay, I'm just gonna smile and I'm gonna take big breaths. And I just started
Yeah.
doing that. And I was like, okay, now I'm just gonna think about things that I'm grateful for. And I did that. And uh I don't know how it happened, but like eventually I fell asleep doing that. And I woke up in the morning, and I was like, oh my gosh, I can't believe I'm back to that like depression or that anxiety or whatever it is. And then I remembered that thing that I was telling you, where like if you read 5 books on any topic, then you'll be the best in the
Yeah.
world. And I've read books on depression, but I haven't read any on panic attacks. And like that's what I've been having more often, is just like these brief flashes of extreme panic.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so I was like, okay, I'll find a book. So and the coolest thing is that like, I was like, okay, I've got all this energy in my body. I got to get out of my body. So I want to go for a walk. Let me find an Audible. I went to Audible. I searched panic attack, found this awesome book called Dare, Dare. And it is like mind blowing. Like read the whole book
Yeah.
listened to the whole book that day, but
Yeah.
it was just like the distinctions in that one book alone was enough to just like completely change my perspective. Like
Wait.
one of the biggest things he
Um,
talks about is like everybody gets stuck in this fear loop because we're afraid of being afraid. Like we're
no, yeah.
afraid of what's going to happen, and then we're afraid of that fear. And so like the first thing in there is just like be like, okay, so what? It's like, oh, but I'm going to pass out. Okay, so what? Oh, but I'm going to look like an idiot. Okay, so what? And it's just like it's these practices. So I wanted to share that for like anybody who has panic attacks or depression or anything, any times when they're just like extremely uncomfortable and things feel like out of their control. Check out that book called Dare, because that will literally change your life.
I'm glad you brought that up too because you said something so important. You said the distinctions. And I think that's one of the things people don't realize that when you start learning about things, it's also learning vocabulary, learning how to name things, how to refer to things, how to conceptualize them. That makes you so much better at dealing with these things and having that epiphany moment, right? Whether it's a panic attack or whether it's a new skill, whatever it is, you need the vocabulary to understand what you're doing and to understand how to do it. And I think you're right. Like, dude, those are the worst panic attacks when you wake up in the middle. They're like because I think you're not like, I always thought to myself, like when it happens to me, and it happens, it still happens, but like your brain's not like awake yet fully. So it's like you're waking up in this full on like flight or fight response, right? And it's like it's insane and sweaty and stuff. Yeah. Yeah. I
Yeah.
like that though, because it's like
Another part of the book that I love. So he has a 4-step process. But like the one of the things is like actually inviting it in. Like one of the most disconcerting things about panic attacks is they happen when you're not ready for them.
yeah,
They
and you're
like,
in a state of panic.
oh dude,
It sucks.
they sneak up on you at like a terrible time, and it's just like out of the blue. And so part of part part of that book is like actually inviting it in and almost daring it to be worse, because like in that panic attack we're like a deer in headlights, and we're like, oh my
Yeah,
gosh,
yeah.
oh my gosh, please don't get any worse. But then like he's like, okay, now dare it to get even worse. Be like, oh, can you make my heartbeat faster? Can you make me pass out?
Yeah.
It's like daring it, and realize, and when you do that, it kind of loses its strength, because it's just like, it can't, this is it, like. So I, and that's the cool thing. That was book one. So I now have a whole four other
That's
books that
cool.
I'm going to read. But like, then not only can I be one of the utmost experts in the world on this stuff, but also like I'll be able to better handle my own issues when they come up, and also friends and family when they have
Yeah.
issues as well. I'll be a resource for them to help them.
You have, yeah, and you have competent information because you're reading. I think what people don't realize about too, and why, they say that like the 5 book thing is because, like, especially nowadays, you can get 5 books, new books that are at the top of their field. And you read all of those and you have like basically the most advanced tools to use to deal with any situation.
Yeah, because they're
And like I
built off
think
of
that's
all
what,
the previous
yeah,
knowledge. Yeah.
exactly. And you can use them, like you said, as a way to sort of, they're always a good way to find other stuff to look into and to check out, which is really nice. I
Yeah.
like that. That's a good example. I like that because, yeah, I mean, I think, so often we get caught up in that fear and we get caught up with, panicking about it rather than addressing it, rather than acknowledging it, rather than taking control of it. It makes it so much easier when you do that. And
Yeah.
just really, I think too, the other thing is like, and I think this goes with both the panic attacks, but also just like self-education in general is so empowering because you realize that you have these abilities, that you can realize them in the world, that you can develop these skills, that you can overcome this stuff. And you really just empower yourself to live an intentional life and to live the life that you want. And I think that's probably why self-education is the best education, because you realize you don't need anybody else. You can do it by yourself and you can be that person you want to be. And it's up to you to just do it. And I think that kind of empowerment is priceless. There's nothing else that compares to it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And it's like all of these people that we idolize, they all had to overcome some crazy stuff to get to where they were. Like I
Oh
talk
yeah.
about this a lot, but like Abraham Lincoln was a complete failure until he was 40. Like he just failed again and again and again. He lost his loved ones, like contemplated suicide a whole bunch, deal with melancholy, which was like that generation's form of depression. So
Depression. Yeah.
yeah, so like he had all these things, and yet like everybody's like, okay, what do you know about Abraham Lincoln? Oh, he was a president. He's on the dollar bill. Like he basically, was equal rights and everything like this. Nobody talks about the melancholy, the business failures, being broke, and like all that stuff. But it's like that's part of the process. And by educating yourself, you build that strength to become somebody who can overcome. And like
Yeah.
you start to develop into that type of person who can be what you really want to be.
I like that too, because you overcome all these obstacles. The more obstacles you overcome, the more you recognize you have that ability to do it. The more you
Yeah.
recognize it's just these obstacles are not literal walls in your path. They're just something you have to figure out how to get around. That's it. Or how to climb over. That's all. And I think,
And
you really reframe every problem in your life in a different way because you stop asking, like we talked about this before, right? You stop saying, I can't. You start asking, how can I? How
bingo,
can I get around this? How can I overcome this? What do I need to get past this? That's it.
bingo.
Yeah.
And I think for me, a lot of the difficulties help breed compassion. Because like, like I know the pain that I've been through in certain instances. And when I see other people going through anything similar to that, like it breaks my heart. And so I want to do anything I can to help other people in those situations. So, I definitely think that there's a lot, even though suffering sucks, like there's a lot to be gained from it.
There is a ton to be gained from it, right? It's, I think Nietzsche actually talks about that. He talks about, how we need to reevaluate suffering, not as something that we should fight and rid the world of, but as something that through it we get stronger. That through it forces us to recognize, acknowledge ourselves, and to realize our strengths. It forces us to overcome things. It forces us to basically be better, right? To continue to develop in the world. And I think, when I mention education keeps you young, that's the point, right? It's the more you self-educate, the more you learn, the younger you stay in the sense that you're always discovering new things. You develop that curiosity, that way of looking at the world that keeps you it keeps you from becoming dogmatic, closed-minded, and living on convictions. Instead, everything becomes questionable and becomes something you can sort of explore and look into. And I think there's no other better way to live because it makes you better at dealing with problems.
Yeah. And it definitely compounds upon itself. Like the more you learn, the
Oh
easier
yeah.
it is to learn other stuff. Just because your brain just gets wired to accept so many other
Yeah,
things. Yeah, it's a great thing.
it is.
So I think I'm gonna apply to Harvard. No, I'm kidding.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I
Anything else
definitely
that you
would.
wanted to talk about with the best education that you can get?
I think, man, just go for it. I think
Mhm.
go for it. And like we said, there's so many resources now. Use them. And I think books are probably the best place to start. Honestly, I always think that, but that's me.
Mhm.
But you have so many resources, use them and just take those chances and go for it. Because the second you start trying, you realize the power you have, and you'll just keep going, and then you're unstoppable.
Mm. Yeah, I love books as well. I think they're awesome. I would say for like people who don't know what books, because you were asking that earlier, think of people who you want to be and find their book lists. So like for instance, Charlie Munger, I think he can think things in amazing ways. So I am very intrigued to read his favorite books. So like finding people who inspire you and finding their favorite books so you can at least see the type of stuff that they're reading and that they enjoy.
Oh, I like that one. That's a good idea. Yeah, you can kind of use that as a starting point to at least start getting into it and then
Mhm.
going from there. Yeah. And biographies and stuff are always great. Just finding people you like and looking into the biographies, that's a good place to start. And like I said, find stuff you're interested in because that'll always motivate you to do other things. As long as you're interested, keep that interest. So like I said, if you like photography, reading a book on how to, do photography or how the hardware works or whatever, that's another way in.
Mhm.
Finding your way in that keeps you engaged, that's what's important.
Here's another handy hint. So like everybody loves to go to bookstores and then pick out a whole bunch of books that they're interested in and buy them all and go home and then those books just sit on the bookshelf. So I don't recommend doing that. What I recommend doing is while you're at the bookstore, read the first chapter of the book. If you're not enthralled by the first chapter, then just put it back. Because
Yeah.
if you can't read it in the bookstore, you're never going to read it at home. So you save yourself a whole bunch of time and money by just doing it there. Whereas like there are some books like you can pick up the book and you start reading it and you can't put it down. Like you're like, oh my god. Sometimes even on the first page, you're just like hooked.
Yeah, you have
And
to buy it.
those
Yeah.
are the books that like you need to be reading. So yeah, find them.
And if you can't go to a bookstore, you can just download the Kindle app, go to Kindle store, and you can download a sample of every book before
Mm-hmm.
you purchase it. You get I think it's like 10% or 5%. You usually get at least the first chapter, which is great.
Which is
And like
enough
you said, it's a
which is
good,
enough to know if you'll be interested in the book. Because if you can't get
yeah, it
interested in
is.
that first part, then just don't waste your time. Oh, and
And if you
also
can't tell
don't
what it's
worry.
about in the first part,
Yeah,
if it's so poorly written.
yeah. And also don't worry about finishing books. Like I had such a fetish with finishing books for a while that like I needed to finish the book because I started it. Like I have to finish. And some books like you just learn all you need to know and then it's just the rest is just fluff. So like
Yeah.
sometimes you just got to stop.
Or you don't need all of it. Like there's a lot of times where I'll pick up a book and I'm only interested in chapter 2 or chapter 7 because I'm doing something specific and I don't really care about the rest. And I think that's important too, like recognize what you need. And that's also about planning and scaffolding, right? Recognizing what you need, what you're interested in, and focusing on that so you don't get distracted by all this other crap too.
Mm.
Because focus, I think, reading helps with focus as well. It helps you sort of, develop that set of skills that you need for that.
Okay, I think one of my last points that I wanted to make
Okay.
is something that we didn't really talk about yet. Is like determine. We talked about goals, but we didn't determine like the type of person who you want to be. And I think this
Oh
is
yeah.
this is also really important. So I like to look at it kind of as in like 10 years out and also on my deathbed. Those are kind of the two big points that I like to look at because they give me a better general idea of where I'm going, of like what do I want to be in 10 years and what do I want to have done when I'm dead. So that because that is going to very much determine what education you need to get.
No, it is. I like that too. And I can't believe we didn't mention it, but like, yeah, your imagination is so crucial for this, right? You can imagine yourself in the future. What kind of person you might be? What kind of job would you like? And cultivating that imagination, you do that through reading, through stuff like that as well. And that's a tool that you will need also to, just down the road anyway for self-education. So I like that. Yeah. You got to think ahead, plan out what you want, and also the person you want to be, because that's essential. Good.
Awesome. Well, thank you all so much for joining us for this episode of the Existential Stoic podcast titled The Most Important Education You Will Ever Need in Your Whole Entire Life, This Life, That Life, and the Other Life. It's not a college education, not found at Harvard, not found at, whatever. It's not, get a
It's
good
something.
self-education. Don't let your schooling interfere with your education. If you did enjoy this, make sure to like, subscribe, share. Also join us midweek for a quick fix. It's been an absolute pleasure. I'm Randy. That's Danny. I'll see you later, Danny.
Later, Andy.